What are the odds? From Crack Addict to CEO by Mike Lindell, published in 2019. Digital Hawk holds and owns no copyrights to the reading of this material for educational purposes only. Chapter 10 Toad's Road. The month after Skelly and I did our Blues Brothers skit at Schmitty's, I got an alarming phone call. It was my friend Dean, the one who dared me to jump out of the bus window, and who was Dick Van Sloun's roommate during my brief stint sleeping on his couch. I had last run into him in the early 1990s when Karen and I took the kids to Florida. Dean had married a beautiful woman. They had had a son, and he was working on the space shuttle as a mechanic for NASA. I was happy for him, proud of the way his life had turned out. But in November 1998, he called me at Schmitty's with a disturbing question. Mike, Dean said, do you think it's wrong to kill yourself? I could tell by the way he slurred his words that he was very drunk. His question didn't surprise me. Earlier that year, he had called me asking a bunch of questions about God. Did I think God was real? Did I think there was a heaven? Yes, was my answer to both questions. Since then, Dean's world had turned upside down. He'd lost his job at NASA and his wife had left him. He said a doctor had also told him he might have a brain tumor. The pain is so bad, Mike, he said. I don't know what I'm going to do. I sensed his desperation, and clearly he'd been given some thought to ending it all. I was in shock. He was the one guy out of our group that I thought had it all together, and I knew he'd already faced excruciating pain in his life. Once in the early 80s, five of us, including Dean, Chris, and myself, went to downtown Minneapolis and ended up at a bar called Moby Dick's. It was a dangerous place back then, and we had no business being there. Had no business being there. We were playing pool, and Chris's mouth got us in trouble with some other guys in the bar. The bouncer stomped over and said to me, you need to get your friend out of here now. While trying to get Chris toward the door, he made things even worse, shouting out the worst racial slur I'd ever heard. I hustled him out of there, and the five of us headed to a Burger King down the street. After we ate, I was the last one to leave the restaurant. Out in the street, I saw that a group of 20 or 25 black guys had ambushed Chris and Dean. Furious at Chris for the slur he'd used at Moby Dick's, they had him by both arms and were beating him with fists. Dean was trying to defend Chris when one of the guys kicked him hard in the groin. Dean crumpled to the ground. I ran into the street. Stop, I yelled. You're all dead. My dad's the biggest drug lord in the Twin Cities. You have no idea what you just did. I want names and I want them now. Everything stopped. Dean lay on the ground in the fetal position. The guys who had just beaten him stood over him frozen. Then one guy who seemed to be the leader walked up to me and actually smiled. You make me laugh, he said. He was perfectly calm in that deadly way of a man who's making a threat and intends to deliver on it. You take your raggedy ass suburbanite friends back wherever you came from and don't ever come back. I'm going to let you live. I smiled back. Thank you. As we were about to leave, I addressed the leader and his friends. Hey, you guys, I was kidding. My dad's not a drug lord, and you're all going to be okay. No one's going to kill you. They all busted out laughing. Dean was in pretty bad shape, though. In the end, he actually lost a testicle from his injuries. Obviously, this guy understood what it meant to be in pain. So when Dean told me on the phone that The pain in his head was so bad, he didn't know if he could live with it. I was genuinely concerned. Dean, I've watched you endure more pain than anybody I've ever seen, I said. I don't know what to tell you now exactly, but I think I read somewhere in the Bible that it's wrong to kill yourself. The truth was, I didn't really know. I was just trying to keep my friend from ending his own life. Dean was quite quiet for a second. Then he said, well, I don't want a funeral. I'm serious. I don't want a funeral. We didn't stay on the phone much longer. I hung up and called Dean's brother Mark. He confirmed that Dean was in a really bad place and that he was very worried. A sadness came over me as I realized that someone I cared about deeply had fallen on seriously hard times, taken down by illness, alcohol, and depression. As usual, I saw no parallels or warning signs in my own life. In fact, most nights after Schmitty's closed, I kept my personal party going. My friend Paul, nicknamed Toad, would hold a kind of after party at his house. Toad was a hardworking single guy who put in 40 hours a week at a machine shop. He owned his home. He owned his own home right across the street from the Dairy Queen and kept it in immaculate condition. He could have afforded something bigger since he'd inherited something like $300,000 from his parents, but Toad banked that money and never touched it. He wanted to use it for something that would make his parents proud. Most nights, at least a dozen of us would end up at Toad's drinking beer, doing cocaine, and talking about what all had gone on at Schmitty's. Going to these parties had become almost routine for me. I would work at Schmitty's, go to Toad's, and some days, thanks to the cocaine, I would stay there until it was time to go back to the bar. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved being a husband and a dad, but I rationalized all the time I spent away from home. I was building my customer base, I reasoned. I was the life of the party, showing people things they'd never seen before. In this case, a good time guy who had such a great marriage that he could remain awake for days on end, hang out with friends night after night, and return at will to his loving wife at home. What a joke. One night, a burly guy none of us had met before came over to Toad's, looked around, and slapped money on the table. $100 for the last man standing, he said. Toad didn't even hesitate. He pulled out $100 of his own money and slapped it down. $100 on him, he said, pointing to me. He's already been up for 3 days. The guy looked at me and then at Toad. Why would you do that? Because sooner or later, you're going to have to go to work. Because sooner or later, you're going to have to go to work, told told him. The stranger looked back at me and I just shrugged. He grabbed his $100 and left. The regulars had always looked forward to Toad's after parties, but slowly something began to change. One night in early 1999, my friend Kevin Chase dropped in. Kevin had been a Schmitty's regular for years, but I hadn't seen him in about 6 months because he had been living up north. It was 2 a.m., and now the only people left at the house were me, Toad, Kevin, and our friend Dan. The four of us were sitting around the kitchen island when I laid out 4 lines of cocaine. Instead of snorting the lines, Dan and Toad scraped theirs into a spoon and headed to separate bedrooms. Kevin looked at me and frowned. What the hell? He said. It wasn't the first time these guys had done this. Kevin, you won't believe it, I told them. They're taking the coke in the back and turning it into crack cocaine. They'd been doing this for weeks by the time Kevin showed up. They go in the back and smoke it, I said. It's weird. They stay back there for a really long time. I've seen them peeking out the windows every few minutes, all paranoid. I had also noticed that anyone who had started smoking crack hardly came into Schmitty's anymore. And when I saw them at Toad's, all they wanted to do was grab their Coke and disappear into the bedrooms. We don't even talk anymore, I told Kevin. It's ruining us. Kevin and I looked at each other. I don't want to get like that, I said. Let's promise each other we will never, ever smoke crack. Chapter 11 to be continued.